All right, yes. Production triumph. I'm an excellent producer. Starting off on a new foot, we got music. I hope I don't get sued by LMFAO and Lil Jon. But I'm Angie Rasmussen. This is Jessica Melati Rivera. We're back for our usual show, Taking Shots, which we're now doing Tuesdays and Fridays when we can, more or less. Today, there's been a lot of stuff going on. So we'll keep doing also the morning news updates again on days that we can do it, which has been most days for me lately, because there's a lot of stuff to keep up with. And, every day brings a fresh new horror. Today, our horror has to do with both the situation in DRC and Uganda with the Bundibugyo Ebolavirus outbreak. And boy, I just have to make a confession about something that we've discussed here on the show before, and that is the way that the word Bundibugyo is pronounced. You may recall that I was on Team Soft G pronouncing it Bundibugyo because that's how I've been pronouncing it for the past 13 years since I became aware of it. Turns out that that's how the CDC pronounces it. So that was the final nail in the coffin for the soft G, because I've had Jess and many others say that it's pronounced with a hard G in East Africa. And I don't want to make up a word because some white guy told me that that's how the word is pronounced. So anyways, bottom line, I'm on Team Hard G now because I have to have something that I can feel excited and positive about, given how dire and rough the entire situation is.
Team Hard G.
What do you think? What have you been traumatized by over the long weekend and today?
God, where to begin? I'll start by saying that there's still a very, very serious detachment from reality when it comes to how people are talking about the risk of Ebola. And I feel like you and I are constantly getting just berated online about like, oh, you're just gagging for a pandemic. You just can't wait for the next one. And I'm like, I am doing every single thing I can to help prevent the next one, because it was not our holiday. It was our nightmare as well, because we are humans. We have families, we have loved ones, we have people we care about, we have our own mental health that we're concerned with. And we're trying to do everything we can to help reduce harm, to help provide indicators and warnings, to get people prepared, to create resilience to these problematic takes, as well as these dangerous threats that are looming and sometimes emerging. And yet it almost feels like people are trying to get us to say it's going to become a pandemic. And we keep saying it's not. Now, it not becoming a pandemic is not the measure of severity. And that's where I want people to understand that, like, it doesn't have to be a pandemic for it to be catastrophic. It can be a regional epidemic, which it is becoming. We can talk about the case counts in a second. For it to be very destabilizing to a massive continent, to multiple economies, to multiple government systems, to communities. And if we are looking at this with comparison to other outbreaks, it's very much on the trajectory of a multi-year epidemic, like we saw in West Africa in 2014 to 2016. And so we're trying to give people as much information as they can, while telling them, A, not to panic. The risk of you getting Ebola here in the US is extraordinarily low, unless you are in contact with a actively symptomatic person with active Ebola infection, and you come into contact with their bodily fluids, not just sitting next to them. And it's just, I can't make it more clear that it not being a pandemic is not the measure of severity here. It being a absolutely terrible epidemic is what we are talking about. And let's focus on what we're trying to mitigate here, not the what is it going to do to me in America conversation.
Yeah, it's so frustrating because I can't remember if we were talking about it, or I think you've also spoken about it separately on your social channels and in your media appearances. But I think one of the most frustrating things about this is, like, you don't have to be at risk for getting Bundibugyo virus or Ebola like to be concerned about it and to have it affect your life.
Yes.
This won't affect your life as obviously as if you got Ebola, but it will still affect your life, and it still may affect your life in a really profoundly negative way, because I think that people have a really, really difficult time understanding what it's going to be like when thousands of people have died of a really, truly horrible disease.
Yeah.
And everybody uniformly in the world, regardless of their political position, really can't deny the fact that this death toll is going to be much, much larger because of the US withdrawal from the WHO and the gutting of USAID and PEPFAR and other foreign aid programs. Our inability to send experts to DRC, to Uganda, our unwillingness to support programs that we initially developed in partnership with people there for the express purpose of preventing an outbreak like this one. We just decided to end that. And we knew that this would be the consequence, and we did. The United States, I mean. And I just don't see how that's not going to have an impact on every single American's life, because it's going to profoundly affect the US's standing in the world. The US is going to be responsible for thousands of people dying from freaking Ebola that didn't have to.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's at this point, knowing with the major caveat that this is an undercount, there are over 900 suspected cases in the Democratic Republic of Congo with over 225 suspected deaths. We have confirmed cases in Uganda now, up to 7 confirmed cases and 1 confirmed death. It seems that 5 of the 7 are known to be connected to the first 2 cases connected to the DRC outbreak, as far as like caregivers or healthcare workers associated with that index, with those early cases from DRC. We have not seen it cross another border yet in a confirmed way. There's suspicion of it, and that's why there's a lot of, extra emphasis on border surveillance to make sure that we reduce the regional spread. But again, we've talked about kind of the non-science reasons why this is a big threat, is that there are socioeconomic pressures that push people across borders. There are economic pressures. There are combat and military measures that are making it so that people are crossing unofficial borders where countries do touch and share a border, and it makes it really difficult to understand. And I shared this on CNN a couple of days ago. When a disease goes undetected for several weeks, and we can look back at COVID in those early days of COVID going undetected because our testing was so bad, that delay in one of the most important times of an outbreak, which is the beginning, right? In those first few days of understanding, okay, who, what, when, where, and why, we are still playing catch up from the beginning of the outbreak, if that makes sense. There was unmitigated, undetected spread for as far back as we can say March. I think, Angie, is the earliest prediction I heard of this could have emerged in March. And you're thinking, okay, I need to know every single person who may or may not be a close contact. Think about the traffic in that area, the conditions of that area. There are so many people who have gone completely under the radar as potential close contacts who probably should have been in quarantine, contacts who, God forbid, but possibly were symptomatic and should have been in isolation. But because we're playing catch up, it is now a much cloudier picture for us to understand the who, what, when, where, and why. I mean, when people have asked us, well, what about a vaccine? Will that just fix it? Okay, let's think about, even if we had a vaccine, we need a vaccine for ring vaccination campaigns, which means that you know exactly who you're targeting, because it has to be a very targeted approach to go in concentric circles out to make sure that you are stopping the spread. And so that's where I'm losing sleep still, is that just thinking about how many people have slipped through the cracks of what used to be a pretty solid system of surveillance when the systems and the infrastructure were not dismantled.
Yeah, I mean, DRC and Uganda have both dealt with numerous filovirus outbreaks in recent years. This is the DRC's 17th Ebolavirus outbreak. There have been outbreaks of Marburg, Sudan virus, which is another type of Ebola virus. So you're absolutely right. These two countries actually have some of the most experienced people in the world. In fact, one of the health ministers, former health minister of DRC, was one of the people who actually initially responded to Ebola's emergence in 1976, 50 years ago, in what was then Zaire, which is, when this virus came to everybody's attention. It's the 50th anniversary of it this year. So Bundibugyo virus did not emerge until much later. But we've now, because of all these filovirus outbreaks, appreciated that they do pop up out of nowhere. They're happening more frequently. They're not really out of nowhere. We know some of the activities that they're associated with, but if we don't catch them early, then this can happen. Now with West Africa, and I defer to you, Jess, because as you know, I'm not an epidemiologist, and poor Jessica has to deal with me constantly texting her and being like, what is this model? Is this any good? Do I believe this? I don't know what they're talking about.
Same with me asking you about these genomic trees and all the virology details.
Yeah, it's really good that we have such complementary expertise, because honestly, sometimes you never know what to make of this model data. It's like, oh, it could be like just a couple hundred cases. We've almost caught them all too. Oh, there could be more than 1,000. And, unfortunately, it seems from talking to you and our other colleagues who are EPIs, that exactly what you said is the reason that this is going to be a protracted, I think, multi-year epidemic that, I don't see how we can possibly even come close to containing it. If we have said in the last WHO situation report, which granted there's only been one so far, and that one had said that 541 contacts had been identified so far in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And now, as you said, we have more than 900 suspected cases in the DRC. For some of these cases, there hasn't been contact tracing at all. And as you said, also, it's an undercount. So there will be people who've been exposed who are completely just lost to any type of surveillance, and this is not an area that I'm an expert in. I want to say that up front. I do not pretend to understand the extremely complex overall situation, political, socioeconomic, cultural, of this region. This region is very large. It is the size of the state of Florida geographically. So this is not some tiny, cozy corner of DRC. This is a huge area that this virus has now spread over. And as you said, there's a lot of instability. There's people moving around. There is a lot of distrust. And I know you talked about this extensively on CNN. I tend to think of the distrust as America's betrayal of these countries. But there are other reasons as well. For example, the extremely complex civil war, basically, that is going on in this part of the DRC that causes, people to move around. There's a number of different conflicts, humanitarian crises. There are multiple refugee populations. And so the conditions are of people who have really, really suffered extensively from things that are not Ebola related. And as a result, they are understandably and rationally suspicious of both the international community as well as government officials. And that makes health responses, it makes it really, really important to take the time to do this in a way that engages people within their communities and empowers them, not, tells them this is how you're going to bury your dead from now on. And we don't really care what your cultural practices are because you don't want Ebola, do you?
Right.
That is not the way, as you've pointed out, to communicate with people about this stuff. We need to be careful about this. We need to take lessons that we've learned from prior Ebola outbreaks where this has happened before and learn from it. And we have learned from it. But right now, we don't have any money to implement any of those things that we've learned. So it's almost worse because we know that things could be better. And we've just, again, our leaders have decided that they're not going to be for reasons.
Yeah. I have a healthy dose of suspicion on foreign aid because of my, concern over white saviorism and, kind of neo-colonial and imperialist sentiments that are the undertone of a lot of things that can happen. However, I know this for certain because I know the people that were doing this in Central Africa. one of USAID's most important jobs was community engagement, was relationship building. And like you said, this is their 17th outbreak of Ebola. Ebola is not new. However, Ebola resilience training, Ebola misinformation debunking, Ebola kind of preparation involves a ton of repetition and consistency in those communities to prepare them for when these catastrophic events happen. I mean, even if there is a knowledge that Ebola is this highly contagious disease, that people can remain contagious even after they've deceased, which means that their burials have to be treated almost like, very sterile, countercultural experiences because they need to be treated like a hazmat situation. That requires a steady, consistent, culturally competent, empathy-led communications campaign. And we're seeing already, it's happened a couple times. There was a clinic that was set on fire because family members wanted to visit a sick and recently deceased person. There was protests at a funeral because it's a very high contact experience when you honor the dead in some of the some of the cultural practices there. And again, it's a very diverse area. So there's multiple types of cultures and multiple religions. There are Muslim people there. In the Muslim tradition, burials need to happen within 3 days of passing away, and they need to be washed and they need to be buried in a shroud. Like, these are things that can't always be observed because of how dangerous it is. And when you say things like, oh, well, we'll just go and send some money, $23 million, and shore up 50 clinics, that is not it. Mind you, in the 2014 outbreak, those clinics that we built took months, almost half a year to actually build. So, like, sure, let's do that. But let's also not forget that so much of this mitigation is like non-pharmaceutical interventions, communications, contact tracing, community engagement, and figuring out who and when and how we should apply things like policies for isolation and quarantine. It's almost this, like, the soft diplomacy of the diplomacy work that often gets treated like this afterthought. And it's very frustrating because I do think that the impact of a disease outbreak, I mean, again, I'm kind of showing my bias here as an infodemiologist, the impact of an epidemic is so much more acute when there's bad information about the epidemic. And trust is already so low there. There is so much suspicion about foreign aid, again, because of the things that I mentioned before. People think that they come in, they exploit, the US has had a pretty terrible history with things like that. Thinking about the vaccine, the fake vaccination campaign that happened to get Osama bin Laden. Like, there's been a lot of things we've done terribly. But I do think USA did something really valiant in this region, and that destruction, that fracture of that relationship really created an even bigger gap in trust and confidence in our ability to help support when there's an emergency.
No, absolutely. And, USAID, I think, was an example of an agency that actually focused a lot on building capacity, a lot more than it focused on just providing aid, which I think in the past has really underlaid this idea that, we are the rich Americans who know better, and we're going to just tell you what to do. We're going to extract anything that we find valuable out of this, take it back, and have our own IP that we're not going to share with you. And we're going to put it in all of our fancy academic journals and get all the credit for it. And you're not going to get any. And that used to be the attitude. It was like, we're the white virologists parachuting in, and we are going to just, go virus hunting and treat you like a bunch of faceless people who are providing biological samples for us. And that attitude, I mean, I think very few people still have it, because you quite simply won't be able to work with anybody. Nobody will want to work with you if that's the kind of attitude you have. This was so problematic. And it still remains problematic. I think a lot of people, particularly people from the global north in the US and Canada and the EU, don't, they think about this like, oh, we're going to build more capacity and we're going to have more collaborators in these countries. But they still aren't thinking about it like, this isn't my thing to do. I need to contribute to this and let somebody else lead it who is living in the place where they are effective. We need to start thinking about this as a global world. And so it's not about who gets the credit. It's about early detection and an effective response. And in order for that to happen, everybody around the world who's participating in this global coordinated response needs to play an important role. And some people are going to play different roles from different countries, but in the place where Ebola viruses are constantly emerging, you want to have the people in country who are dealing with it every day be supported in their work, because they are the best experts in the world at this.
Yeah.
And what we've done is just say, well, nice training you. You guys are great colleagues to work with. Have fun doing all of this without anything. Here's $13 million or $23 million, whatever. It's a drop in the bucket. That is nothing. And that is what is going to continue happening, I fear. We're going to be seeing these little gestures that are meant to simulate some kind of response that actually cares. And then we're going to get gaslighted about it, where it's like, what are you complaining about? We just gave $23 million to build 50 Ebola clinics. Try doing that, Joe Biden. I mean, no, Joe Biden wouldn't have done that, because, he would have invested the proper amount of money into the response.
Right.
Or at least, more money than $23 million anyways. Maybe not the proper amount. Is there a proper amount? We never have enough money to deal with these things. But we would have had at least an effective response. We would have had our USAID infrastructure intact. I mean, it's hard for me to continue explaining to people that this is not just like, oh, we canceled a funding program. I mean, this is a cancellation of people's lives, literally. Yeah. And we're seeing, unfortunately, with the most horrific disease possible, we're seeing exactly that.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk too about the news that hit today about this potential deployment of our public health service people. So folks who don't know, we have something called the Public Health Service. It is essentially the task force that the U.S. Surgeon General would be in charge of. It is a very, very diverse network of clinicians, of epidemiologists who are part of our first response as a direct kind of application of the Public Health Act of 1879, where in situations in which the United States would need to be part of isolation or quarantine of a contagious disease, or potential hygiene and sanitation support in places where an event is happening, these are people, these are experts who we would deploy. And we use the word deploy almost like the military. I mean, just like the military, even though they are not technically armed service.
They're uniformed services, though, so they are part of the military.
Right. They're uniformed services, but they're not like armed military services. Right. And so there was news today that said that they might be deploying a few dozen of these service people for the purpose of creating a quarantine isolation situation in Kenya. Not a place that is currently affected by the outbreak, but perhaps a place in which they would put a very subjective and undefined term, high risk, high exposure contacts through potentially 21 days of quarantine or isolation. It's bewildering. There's no concrete information on it, and it doesn't actually make any sense.
It's completely insane when you consider that a number of people were evacuated from West Africa, and some people actually just left West Africa on their own when their their service ended, treating Ebola patients to respond to that epidemic. And then later they became symptomatic and ended up with Ebola. In none of those cases did we have onward transmission, because all of those people were sent to biocontainment units, which the US government, the US taxpayers invested hundreds of millions of dollars in, so that when Americans did get one of these horrific diseases, we could bring them home, provide them with the best care, and protect every other American from getting this horrible disease. But we brought our people home. We took care of our people with our taxpayer money. Mm-hmm. And we are not going to do that now. With the first American who tested positive, we sent him to Germany. Why? Not because we are unable to manage Ebola patients. Again, we saved people's lives who were evacuated from West Africa, who certainly would have died had they not received the level of care and expertise that they did. Ian Crozier at Emory Medical Center, for example. the supportive care that was provided by these experts is exactly what people in DRC and Uganda are going to need right now. And they're not going to get it because people in Africa are not getting this level of care, no matter how many Ebola clinics you shore up or build. For its own citizens, though, the US is saying you can no longer use the resources that your tax dollars paid for exactly a situation like this. And I should add that these Americans who were infected were not like some sort of weird tourists who are in this part of the world. They were actually providing medical care as part of a Christian missionary organization that really is in line with at least what the Trump administration professes to believe and be their guiding faith principles. So it's puzzling that the government's official policy for those people was, ew, Ebola, don't let them back home. And now it seems that we are actually mobilizing not just the Public Health Service Commission Corps, but actually the Department of War. That's what this press release said. And I don't know what exactly that means. I mean, it's not unprecedented. In West Africa, we deployed, I think, 3,000 Army active duty personnel to assist with putting together some of those clinics, with conducting diagnostic testing, with managing the response. There's all kinds of things that need to be done in a response, especially if you have to build stuff. And there's a lot of people in the Army who are very good at doing all of those things. But that's not what the Department of War is going to be deployed for in this condition. The Department of War in this situation and the Public Health Service is going to be asked to leave the country themselves when they might not be able to get back in if they are a high-risk exposure, and basically detain Americans illegally, prevent U.S. citizens from returning home, maybe in a situation where they most need to return home. It's unclear what they're going to do with anybody who does test positive, and it sounds an awful lot like a jail more than it sounds like a medical facility.
It's very concerning to me about how subjective this whole thing is, because who and how
it's completely unscientific. And not to bring up hantavirus because I'm so sick of it, and it's so not going to be a problem. It's not airborne the way that people have been saying it, but on the basis of all this fear mongering with hantavirus, now they're talking about forcing the people from that cruise ship to stay in quarantine in Nebraska, not even home quarantine. They're basically imprisoning them and violating their 14th Amendment rights on nothing, on like vibes. Like maybe it could go airborne. I saw somebody tweet about it. You know, that is like the level of gold standard science that's being done here. It's like we're afraid of these viruses and we don't want them spreading in America, especially not before the midterm elections. So we're just going to keep them out. And it doesn't matter if we actually completely violate the most fundamental constitutional rights of American citizens in the process. We don't want your gross Ebola here.
Yeah. It's, it's still very shocking to me and to you, and to many of our colleagues, that an American physician was denied repatriation, knowing the facilities that we have spent perhaps collectively billions of dollars on reinforcing, places in Emory, places in Boston and Nebraska. The fact that we would deny their entry. How do you think they're going to treat other people, especially non-Americans? I mean, this has the ban already, as we've explained to you, is based in fear. It's not based in science. And then we add this other way to screen / imprison folks in a detention center, essentially. Based on
American citizens.
American citizens. I mean, and this was referring to U.S. passport holders and non-U.S. passport holders, which we can already assume non-U.S. passport holders will probably be treated far worse. But knowing how we treated a U.S. passport holder, everybody would probably be treated quite poorly. This does not have the scientific foundation of good infection prevention and control policies. In fact, I would love to talk to Saskia more about this, who is an IP specialist when it comes to how to mitigate the spread of a very infectious disease. It's not this. I've worked in IP as well, not as extensively as she has, and this would never be the top thing to invest in for deploying people, especially people who, as you just mentioned, may risk their ability to be repatriated back. I mean, you're talking about, it says on the CDC website that non-US passport holders or US passport holders may have to wait 21 days before they would even come back. Imagine if every service person from the UPS Public Health Service, PHS, was deployed, did their thing, and then somebody determined they had a high-risk exposure. So on top of the deployment, they have to wait an extra 21 days. Imagine.
Are we going to tell our active duty service members that they can't come back if they had a high risk exposure? They're literally testing people for Ebola. So if somebody tests positive, then anybody who's around them is now high risk exposure. They don't define what that means.
No.
But I mean, every single American watching this, I can't emphasize how much these people came to power by complaining about their medical freedom being violated.
Yes.
And lockdowns kill people. We have to err on the side of freedom over health, always. Now, they don't want a health situation, so they are denying people their freedom. They're trying to, lock down Jay Bhattacharya, who literally sued the U.S. government for censoring him about saying that lockdowns killed, signed the order to imprison people effectively in Nebraska because, they might have hantavirus and somebody was scared about it on the internet. Mm-hmm. They're going to do the same thing to Ebola. And every single American should know what happens when it's not Ebola anymore. What happens when they're saying that you have HIV? You were exposed to tuberculosis. You were exposed to any number of common diseases that most people don't think about because they're not very prevalent in the U.S. But since the U.S. isn't doing public health anymore, I guess the best way to prevent those diseases from spreading is to just keep people out who might have them or who might have even been exposed to them with undefined terms. If you are a U.S. citizen, you should be able to come home whenever you want. That is your constitutional right. Your country is going to illegally imprison you in a foreign country to prevent you from coming home if you end up in a very, very difficult health situation.
This is the problem.
Scare the hell out of everybody.
We're just trying to expect logic from a completely illogical, unscientific basis of thinking and policy making, right? You're looking at a group that's talking about my body, my choice, except for abortion. We're talking about medical freedom and allow me to do what I want, except for diseases from scary places or from other places or from places that are too far away or I don't know how to pronounce. It's
too many brown people. Don't forget that one.
I mean, let's just say it as it is. This is not logic. And I made a point to read verbatim the language in the Public Health Emergency of International Concern Declaration from the WHO. It said it in bold letters that no country, and it was talking about non-member states included in this recommendation, that no country should issue travel bans, that they will cause more harm. And here we are a month into this, a few weeks into this post-declaration, and we are seeing the writing on the wall already. The harm is already happening. You saw the policy of the soccer team needing to be in forced quarantine as well. I mean, this is exposure just because they came from a massive country.
Well, I mean, I talked about this. I think it was on one of these, little news shows where I fly solo. But I did talk about this in this, not about the soccer team, but about what happened to this flight from France.
Well, that was diverted, yeah.
So it was diverted to Montreal because there happened to be a dude with a Congolese passport on board. Like he had no exposure to Ebola. DRC is a very large country, okay, huge. With millions. I don't know what the population is, but it's very large.
Kinshasa alone is 18 million people.
Yeah, it's a huge country with a huge population of, as you pointed out, many different diverse people who live in parts of this country that are often geographically difficult to access for people in other parts of the country, which is the case for northeastern DRC. There is no indication whatsoever that this passenger had been anywhere near Ituri province or North Kivu province or Uganda or anything. He just happened to be Congolese. So they diverted the flight to Montreal, took him off and made Public Health Agency of Canada test him. No problem. We got lots of Ebola experts here. I'm only one of them. My good friend and colleague, Jason Kinderchuk, is the head of the National Microbiology Lab in Winnipeg. Got lots of great colleagues there, not worried about what would happen to this patient if he had Ebola, which of course he tested negative, because there's no reason to think that every person in the Democratic Republic of Congo is just incubating an Ebola virus infection. And, it was negative. And so they sent the plane before waiting for the test results on to the United States, on to Detroit. If he had been positive, how does this work? So they just took the one guy off. Do they realize that viruses can spread between people?
Incredible, right?
So like you take the guy off because like, oh, we'll get the Ebola guy off of there because he's happened to be black and he's from Congo. And then we're just going to let everybody else be okay because, they're healthy people. They don't get sick. But then we're just going to let them all off into Detroit to run around and spread Ebola, I guess, around America. I mean, that wouldn't happen, but that's like the logic that's going on behind these policies. Travel bans don't work. They drive people underground, and I'll guarantee you exactly what's going to happen. People are going to go to Germany or whatever. They're going to go to Frankfurt. They're going to go to Brussels. They're going to go wherever, and they're going to buy a different ticket that starts at that airport. And then they're going to say, I wasn't in the DRC. And unless, the U.S. government is tracking like where all of its citizens are going all the time, it's not going to be possible, I think, to determine every single person who came from DRC or Uganda. So, I mean, they're going to miss people. And honestly, like, I would be getting on a plane going back to the U.S. right now if I was working in Central Africa, because this is no incentive to stay. Like, where you're going to stay and maybe get a virus that's going to kill you horribly. And, even a real bad non-epidemiologist, rough back of the envelope calculation, this is a 24% mortality rate. If you just assume that all the suspected cases and deaths are actually Ebola, maybe less than that. But are we quibbling seriously about whether 24% is so much better than 30%? Like, that is a fuckload of people dying. That is 1 out of every 4 people who gets this virus is going to die. Why would you stay in a country, even if you're the most pure-hearted, missionary-minded, helper person trying to do what's right? You can't take that kind of risk with your own life, with your family's life, that you could get a virus like that and not be able to come home and get access to the treatment and care that you need.
Yeah. No, there's no incentive. I have been in enough group texts where people have been like, would you go? Would you go? Crickets. Who would go? And that's so deeply discouraging, because all of us in public health, in the variety of roles that we play, virology to epidemiology to PHS to whatever we're doing in between, we are in this because we care about population health. We care about harm reduction. We care about the altruism is at its core, communities at its core. So this goes against why we are even in this field of work, to have systems and policies in place that would remove incentives to do the work that we signed up to do. And it's deeply discouraging, because these are jobs, yes, and are necessary. But if you create conditions that make it so that people could be harmed by taking the job, nobody's going to do them.
No, and if the harm is like, you're going to be stuck like far from home with Ebola, with Bundibugyo Ebola virus, which we don't have any monoclonals or any kind of treatments for, maybe we'll just make your life even a little bit more miserable by giving you remdesivir, which will have terrible side effects and probably won't work. I mean, like, literally that's what we're saying to people. And even the best person in the world, people only have so much of themselves to give. And this is something I've been thinking about a lot, just with my own health problems and the things that I've been dealing with in terms of struggling with this particular moment. We're all sort of facing like our own personal nightmares. I feel like all the time, in terms of public health, in terms of our profession. We're all a dying breed, even if we're not dying of Ebola virus disease. And I just can't stop thinking all the time about, like, what are we here for? Like, what is my limit like at which I say, like, I can't give any more of myself. And like, I've been at that limit for a few months, and it's something I've been working with my medical team, my family, because it's literally at the point where it's physically having an impact on me. And it's not just like I'm having, a rough time, because we're all having a rough time. I mean, this is like, oh, this could kill me, actually. And to at some point you have to say, like, and this is something that, again, I'm really struggling with, because I'm the type of person who's like, do whatever it takes to get it done. And, you can't do that when all of a sudden it becomes your health, your life, like your well-being, your ability to do anything that's on the line. And I think that this is one of those things where the US is actually making it easy for people, because if this were, it's like, okay, Angie, if you keep doing this stuff, you might get Bundibugyo virus. And I mean, I'm not the kind of person who likes to go out into the field. I definitely like a nice, comfortable containment lab and my own bed. So that's unlikely. But, if I were a physician going out into the field, I don't know that I'd be able to do it. And I was talking to one of our colleagues who is a very, very seasoned physician, has operated numerous clinics during Ebola outbreaks, has operated multiple biocontainment units, really knows her stuff about Ebola. And I keep hearing the same thing from her and other colleagues, but I thought she put it really the best in a way that really resonated with me anyways. And that is like, I would have to go into myself and find what it was that allowed me to do that before.
Yeah.
And the consensus for all the people who were in West Africa is that they're not sure that they can do that. And I don't blame them. The stuff that they saw, it's going to be worse this time in terms of the horrors of this outbreak. West Africa did not have as many cases at this point in that epidemic.
Yeah.
And even if this started much longer ago, I mean, we're still, I think, past where West Africa would be. So there was something, and, I leave it to you and our other epidemiologist colleagues to sort of figure out how this started in terms of how it spread through the population. But it does seem like, unlike the West African epidemic, this one didn't smolder. This one took right off. And because of all the mobility, we didn't recognize it for what it was. And the fact that Ebola, doesn't look like what a lot of people think Ebola looks like.
Yeah.
A lot of people are really disappointed to hear it's like a lot of diarrhea and vomiting, and a lot less like, blood's pouring out of your ears.
Yeah, exactly. Angie, I'm thinking about, what this week is going to look like. The Director General, Tedros of the WHO, is expected to be in Kinshasa and Bunia this week. I believe that they and a team of other WHO officials have left Geneva to go and assess the situation. I'm going to be very keen to follow any updates from the field, and hopefully we can provide an update on Friday. But at this point, a lot of what we've shared with you has not really changed. The risk to the people who are watching this and who closely follow us is extremely low, but we are watching, unfortunately, what is unfolding to be the beginning of a terrible, very prolonged season of suffering in Central Africa. And I'm very concerned. We both are very concerned about what the US is trying to do, attempting to do, as far as what feels like just, I don't know, washing their guilty conscience away by throwing money, small money at the problem, and perhaps deploying, these incredible service people and also somehow keeping them hanging in the process. So I'm not really sure how to really process all that, except for I'm just deeply confused and deeply worried.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. And this is such a different feeling than during West Africa. And like I said, I'm not a first responder. I'm not the person on the ground. But when the West African epidemic was happening, I mean, I remember this so vividly, because I'd been already working on Ebola pathogenesis. And I was at the filovirus meeting in March of 2014 in Galveston. And there were a few people not there because at this point, oh, it's Ebola, but that's a surprise. Like, we didn't expect it to pop up there in West Africa, like thousands of miles away from where the nearest Ebola was last time. But okay, we should be able to contain this using the same methods we have. And I don't think anybody realized that it had been going on for 3 months at that point. And that was a response that was not effective at first because there was such a big delay, but the situation wasn't the same as the situation is here. There were still issues with distrust. There were still a couple isolated incidents of public health teams, having, engaging, I guess, in being protested with violent protest, I guess, for lack of a better term, or security issues. But, it wasn't the same as this, where we're talking about just such a huge area and so many cases so early in the outbreak, but also a complete lack of anything that we tried with the West African outbreak. And I don't think this piddly amounts of money that the U.S. is putting towards this to soothe anybody's conscience. I think it's to put on the appearance of, look, our withdrawal from this hasn't affected anything. We're doing such a great job. Another Maha win. And of course, that's not true. I mean, this is an Orwellian way of addressing the fact that they have made policy choices that they knew would have this effect, that they knew would kill people. And it's because they wanted to steal the money from USAID. They wanted to redirect that money to the executive branch to further consolidate power and undermine American democracy. And that's the other reason why Americans really should worry about this. They don't care about your constitutional rights, your freedom. They don't care about your safety if you get exposed to one of these viruses abroad. And they don't actually care about any of this. They don't care if thousands of people die, because the goal is actually to end our democracy and steal the treasury. And I know that sounds crazy, but unfortunately it's true.
I maybe we should finish on this note, because I get this question a lot. Like, why does America have to be on the hook for this? Like, why is it our problem? Why is it all about USAID and the gutting of USAID? And I just want to level set with folks here and say, there was no larger contributor to this type of work on the development side, on the aid side, and on the global health security side than the US. And in the absence of the US, other countries have had to fill that gap, but they are not the size of the United States. They don't have the kind of giving capacity that the US has ever had historically. So countries like Germany and China have certainly stepped up and filled a lot of those diplomatic holes as well. But then other, foundations as well too. The Gates Foundation has had to write much bigger checks to fill that gap. But when we talk about America first and national security, this is why we're explaining to folks that our investment in these things outside of the country was directly related to the success of this country and the democracy continuing in this country, and the disruptions that can happen in economies and democracies because of infectious diseases are why these investments were important. I mean, I feel like we scream about this all the time, but when people talk about the Roman Empire, let's talk about the Roman Empire. You know what took it down? Disease. Not war, it was disease. And that's why investment in these things is not just us nerds freaking out about our research and freaking out about our labs and freaking out about pandemics. It is because the thing that unites us all is that we are all susceptible to pathogens. And pathogens, when they affect enough people, can completely ruin civilization.
Yeah, I mean, they are the primary driver of the rise and fall of different civilizations, of the major things that have happened throughout human history. We are beholden to the pathogens that infect us, and they completely, profoundly transform our world. The reason why America's on the hook for all of this is good for Americans. It's not because, I want to get grants and boy, the pay line is too high, and boy, I don't like all of this competition. It's so hard to get a discussed R01 grant these days. I am not concerned about that academic bullshit at all anymore. I am not concerned about my ability to get NIH grants and fund my lab. I'm worried about all of it, about having labs, about having a public health system, and yes, about what the impact will be on the US on the world stage. Because the reason why we started investing in all of this stuff in foreign countries in the first place goes back to right after the Second World War, when Vannevar Bush recognized that if we invested a lot of money into research and into foreign aid directed towards scientific and medical progress, we would actually be at an advantage in the world in terms of our foreign policy. We would be able to continue basically patting ourselves on the back for being the most morally righteous, exceptional country in all of Earth and human history. American exceptionalism, USA. That is why we started investing in other countries. That is why we have USAID. It is because the US has always seen itself as one of its core values as being a leader in this area, in helping the rest of the world develop to be as awesome as the US. That's what we've abandoned. And that's what essentially our leaders have abandoned so that they can enrich themselves at the expense of everybody else in the world, but especially at the expense of everybody else in America, because they are taking away a 70-year legacy of commitment to global health and global security.
That's right. On that note, I think we
should. On that note, happy Tuesday. We'll see you on Friday, and I will see you at least every day. If once I can make it, I'm going to keep trying to see if Jess can make it. But, we both have so many freaking meetings these days.
I know.
Jess, unfortunately, lives in a time zone that makes my convenient timing terrible for her because it's still the middle of the night. And she actually has a family and stuff. So she can't just stay up at all hours being completely unhealthy.
We do what we can.
We do what we can. Exactly. So I'll see you back here tomorrow. Maybe Jess will join me. We'll try to get our friend Saskia to come talk about some of these infection prevention issues. And our Ebola expert panel that we've been doing with Celine Gounder and some of our other colleagues in this space, I think is going to come out any day now. So when that does, we'll share it. But you'll see a lot of content from us. And I'm doing a lot more of the, young people influencer videos thing. So, check out my Instagram and TikTok. I one day will learn how to use these pieces of software like all the kids are doing.
Yeah.
Anyways, thank you so much, everybody. Pardon me for joining. We will see you on Friday.
See you Friday.
Bye, guys.